Between 1790 and 1890, roughly 7 million Americans abandoned everything they knew to venture across 2,000 miles of wilderness, facing a 1 in 10 chance of dying from disease, starvation, or violence along the way. The journey was brutal and relentless, but for these ordinary people, the promise of land and freedom kept them moving forward despite the odds. Here's what life was really like on the American frontier. Before we start, likes and subscribes help me keep making these. Where are you listening from? Drop your city and time in the comments. I'm always reading them thinking, wait, people in New Zealand listen to history stories to sleep? Alright, let's head back to the American frontier. Trust me, it's gonna be quite a ride. But first, get comfortable. Seriously, adjust those pillows. Pull up that blanket, because where we're going, you're going to want to be cozy. Your eyes flutter open to pitch darkness. For a moment, you're disoriented. The air is freezing, the kind of cold that makes your lungs ache. But it's not just the temperature that's got your attention. It's the smell, wood smoke, unwashed bodies, the earthy scent of the dirt floor beneath you, and something else, fear. This isn't your memory foam mattress in your temperature-controlled bedroom. It's 1792, and you're waking up in a crude log cabin in the Appalachian wilderness. The thin deerskin covering barely keeps the November chill from seeping into your bones. Your back aches from sleeping on nothing but pine boughs spread over hard-packed earth. Thomas Harper, 23 years old and stupidly brave, opens his eyes in the darkness, not like your darkness with streetlights bleeding through curtains. This is complete, soul-swallowing blackness, the kind that makes you question if your eyes are actually open. "Mary," he whispers, reaching for his wife beside him. Her pregnant belly is hard and round under the thin blanket they share. She mumbles something unintelligible, still mostly asleep. Outside, a wolf howls. Then another answers. They sound close. Too close. Thomas shifts slightly, feeling for the Kentucky long rifle he keeps within arm's reach, always. Not like now, where you might have a phone by your bed. His lifeline is black powder and lead ball. I should check the livestock, he thinks. But the thought of leaving the relative warmth of the cabin makes him hesitate. It's probably 15 degrees outside, maybe colder. People die in this kind of cold when they're not careful. Not dramatic movie deaths either, just quiet, sleepy ones where your heart slows down and you never wake up. Unlike your cozy bed with its layers of blankets, Thomas and Mary sleep in their clothes, not just any clothes, the same scratchy, homespun wool garments they've worn for days, weeks even. Bathing in winter is something only fools attempt. You wash your face and hands when you can, but a full bath, that's a spring luxury. The cabin itself is barely 12 feet square. Thomas built it with his own hands and the help of 2 other families who settled nearby. The logs are rough-hewn pine, the gaps between them stuffed with mud and moss. Chinking, they call it. It's a constant battle to keep the elements out. The wind finds every crack, every weakness. "You awake?" Mary's voice is barely audible. "Yeah," Thomas replies. "Wolves again." Mary's hand finds his in the darkness. Her fingers are calloused from work, spinning wool, making soap, cooking over an open hearth, tending the small garden that had provided their meagre harvest before the frost came. Not like your smooth hands that know keyboards and touchscreens better than actual labour. "The baby's kicking something fierce," she says, guiding his hand to her belly. Thomas feels the strong push against his palm and smiles in the darkness. Strong like his pa. Or stubborn like his ma, Mary counters. A log shifts in the fireplace, sending up a brief flare of light that illuminates the cabin's interior. One room, that's their entire world. A rough table Thomas made from a split log, 2 three-legged stools, a Dutch oven and cast-iron skillet hanging near the stone fireplace. Their few possessions stored in a wooden chest, extra clothing, Mary's sewing kit, Thomas's hunting knife, a precious Bible brought from Virginia. In the corner, hanging from the rafters, are strips of venison drying into jerky. Below them, a barrel contains their winter store of corn. It's not enough. Thomas knows this, but doesn't say it. They'll need more meat to survive until spring. The fire has died down to embers. Thomas reluctantly leaves the warmth of the bed to add another log. The floor is ice against his stockinged feet. He moves quickly, stirring the coals before placing a split oak log on the glowing embers. "Gonna be a cold one today," he says, a master of understatements. Mary sits up, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. "I'll get breakfast going. There's no sleeping in on the frontier, no lazy Sunday mornings. The day begins when you can see your breath in the cold air inside your own home. And it doesn't end until you can no longer see your hand in front of your face at night." The wolves have gone quiet. Thomas takes his rifle down from the pegs on the wall, checks the priming in the pan. "I'll check the animals," he says, pulling on a deerskin hunting jacket and a fur cap. "Maybe set some snares after." Before opening the door, he stands for a moment bracing himself for the blast of cold air that will rush in. Mary has already moved to the fireplace, carefully feeding kindling to the growing flames. This choreography of survival plays out every morning. "Be careful," Mary says, not looking up from her work. It's what she always says. On the frontier, it's not just a pleasantry, it's deadly serious. Thomas nods, lifts the wooden latch and pushes the door open. The hinges, wooden pegs, not metal, creak in protest. A wall of frigid air hits him, stealing his breath. The small clearing around the cabin is frosted white, the surrounding forest a dark wall of pine and oak. Their 4 chickens and single milk cow are in the lean-to shelter attached to the cabin's side. He can hear the cow's soft lowing. Another day, Thomas thinks, stepping out into the numbing cold. Just got to make it through another day. Wait, let me paint you a picture of just how insane Thomas Harper's gamble was. This wasn't like moving to a new city for a job. This was Thomas, Mary, and 60 pounds of possessions they could carry, heading into virtually unmapped wilderness with nothing but rumours of good land to guide them. Thomas had grown up in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, the son of a tenant farmer who worked someone else's land until the day he died. Thomas wanted more. He wanted his own land, and the only way to get it was to go where nobody wanted to be, the wild frontier beyond the Appalachian Mountains. The stories he'd heard in taverns painted it as an Eden, land so fertile you could drop seeds and they'd grow overnight, forests teeming with game, clear streams full of fish. What those stories conveniently left out were the hostile native tribes defending their hunting grounds, the bone-crushing labour of clearing forest for fields, and the soul-crushing isolation that drove some settlers actually, legitimately insane. "You know what people back east called moving west?" Thomas would later tell his son. "They called it going to the slaughter. That's how bad the odds were." Okay, back to our freezing morning. Thomas checks the cow and chickens, making sure they've survived the night. The cow is his most valuable possession, worth more than the cabin itself. She provides milk, which means butter and cheese. When she calves in the spring, the calf will eventually mean meat or more milk. You don't eat your cow unless you're truly desperate. That's Frontier Economics 101. The chickens are huddled together, puffed up against the cold. 3 hens and a rooster. Eggs are precious protein, especially in winter when hunting can be difficult. Thomas scatters a handful of corn for them, counting each bird to make sure none died in the night. "All accounted for," he mutters to himself, his breath clouding before him. He glances at the sky, pale blue with wispy clouds. Good hunting weather. With Mary expecting, they need meat desperately. The baby will come in late January or early February, the hungriest time of year. The thought sends a spike of anxiety through him. Winter births are dangerous. No doctor for 50 miles, just Mary and the wife of a neighbouring settler who's delivered a few babies. Not going to think about that now, Thomas tells himself, shrugging his rifle onto his shoulder. The forest around them isn't the manicured woodland of modern state parks. It's primeval, massive trees that have stood for centuries, underbrush so thick in places you need a machete to pass through. It's also alive with threats, wolves, bears, panthers, and sometimes other humans with different ideas about whose land this really is. Thomas walks about 50 yards to check his traps from yesterday. The first two are empty, but the third holds a fat rabbit, already stiff with cold and death. Breakfast and maybe lunch. He quickly resets the traps and heads back toward the cabin, the rabbit hanging from his belt. Inside, Mary has the fire going properly now. The cabin is still cold, but at least you can breathe without seeing it. She's stirring corn mush in the iron pot, their staple breakfast. The rabbit will be a welcome addition. Caught something? She asks, nodding toward the rabbit. Just one, Thomas says, already working to skin it at the small table. Nothing is wasted. The fur will be tanned for sewing, the bones boiled for broth, every scrap of meat eaten. I'll head deeper into the valley later, maybe get a deer if I'm lucky. Mary nods, one hand on her back to ease the strain of her pregnancy. Nathaniel's coming by later, said he might have extra cornmeal to trade. Nathaniel Cohen is their nearest neighbour, living a mile through the forest with his wife and 3 children. They'd arrived 6 months before the Harpers, so they'd had a full growing season to establish themselves. In the isolation of the frontier, neighbours are your lifeline, even when they're a mile away. What's he want for it? Thomas asks, working the knife carefully around the rabbit's hind leg. Said he needs help finishing his root cellar before the ground freezes solid. Thomas nods. Currency is scarce on the frontier. Most exchanges are through barter and labour. He'll work half a day digging Nathaniel's root cellar, and in return they'll have cornmeal to stretch their winter stores a little further. Good deal, he says. I'll head there after I hunt. The rabbit is skinned now, its meat dark red against the wooden table. Thomas cuts it into pieces while Mary adds water to the corn mush, stretching it to accommodate the meat. The smell makes both their stomachs growl. "You're not going too far hunting, are you?" Mary asks, not looking up from her cooking. The question has weight. Just 3 weeks ago, a settler 5 miles north had gone hunting and never returned. After 4 days, a search party found what was left of him. Mauled by a bear or wolves, it was hard to tell. Stay close enough to hear the dinner bell, Thomas promises, though they both know it's not entirely true. You have to go where the game is, and sometimes that's farther than is strictly safe. While they eat breakfast, sitting on stools by the fire, Thomas outlines his plans for the day. Hunting, helping Nathaniel, chopping more firewood if there's daylight left. Mary will card wool, tend the animals, and continue making candles from the deer tallow they've saved. Each day is a carefully choreographed struggle to stay ahead of hunger and cold. "Think it'll snow soon?" Mary asks, looking at the small window, just an opening with a wooden shutter, no glass. Luxuries like window glass are for established towns, not frontier cabins. "Few days, maybe," Thomas says, judging by the feel of the air and the way his left knee aches. An old injury that predicts weather better than any almanac. What they don't discuss are the deeper worries. The winter ahead, the coming baby, the Shawnee hunting party they'd spotted watching their cabin from the ridge last week. Some conversations are too heavy for breakfast, even on the frontier. After eating, Thomas prepares for hunting. He checks his powder horn, making sure it's sealed against moisture. Wet gunpowder is useless gunpowder. He counts his lead balls, 14 left, each one precious. His hunting knife is already sharp. He'd seen to that yesterday. "I'll be back before dark," he tells Mary, pulling on his cap again. "You better," she says, and they both know why. Darkness in the wilderness isn't just an absence of light. It's when the balance of power shifts from humans to predators. Only fools or the desperate travel the forest at night. As Thomas steps outside again, the cold somehow feels even more intense than earlier. The brief warmth of the cabin and food has made him sensitive to it again. He takes a deep breath, letting the chill air fill his lungs. "Right," he mutters to himself. "Let's find some meat." The forest swallows him as he walks away from the clearing. Within moments, the small cabin is out of sight, hidden by the thick trees. Thomas moves quietly, his moccasins barely making a sound on the frozen ground. Every sense is heightened, the way it always is when you step from safety into potential danger. The rifle is heavy in his hands, loaded and ready. His eyes scan constantly, not just for game, but for threats. A snap of a twig might mean dinner, or it might mean something sees you as dinner. The difference is knowing which is which before it's too late. "Hold up," Thomas whispers to himself, freezing in place. 20 yards ahead, a doe is picking her way through the underbrush, unaware of his presence. His heart speeds up. A deer would mean meat for weeks, security, one less worry in a world full of them. Slowly, so slowly, it barely qualifies as movement. Thomas raises the rifle to his shoulder. The deer pauses, ears twitching, sensing something, but it's too late. The rifle cracks, shattering the forest silence, and the doe drops. "Thank you," Thomas whispers, whether to God or the deer or just the universe. It's hard to say. Frontier gratitude is a complex thing. By the way, the Kentucky long rifle he's using, not exactly what you're picturing from the movies. It's effective to about 200 yards, sure, but it's a single-shot weapon. Miss, and you spend a minute reloading while your dinner, or your enemy, decides whether to stick around. And in cold, like this. Your fingers fumble, powder gets damp, everything takes twice as long. Getting the deer back to the cabin is going to be work. Thomas Field dresses it where it fell, removing the internal organs to lighten the load and prevent the meat from spoiling. His hands are soon slick with blood, steaming in the cold air. This is butchery, not the sanitized meat department at your grocery store. It's intimate and messy and absolutely necessary. "Gonna need help dragging this back," he thinks, considering whether to go get Nathaniel now or try to manage it himself. The deer must weigh over 100 pounds, even without the innards, and dragging it might attract predators following the blood trail. He decides to cover the carcass with branches and head to Nathaniel's first. Together they can bring it back more quickly and safely. As he works to hide the deer, a flicker of movement catches his eye. At the top of the ridge, maybe 100 yards away, a figure stands watching him. Thomas freezes, hand moving slowly toward his rifle, but the figure isn't moving aggressively. It's a native man dressed in buckskins with a rifle of his own. For a long moment, they simply look at each other across the distance. The man raises his hand in what might be a greeting or might be a warning. Thomas slowly does the same. Neither makes a move to come closer. After a few heartbeats, the native hunter turns and disappears into the forest. Thomas lets out the breath he didn't realize he was holding. "That could have gone differently," he mutters. The relations between settlers and native tribes are complicated, to put it mildly. Some tribes are openly hostile, viewing the settlers as invaders, which, let's be honest, they are. Others have established uneasy trading relationships, and everything can change depending on which tribe you're dealing with, which settler, and what happened the last time they met. Thomas finishes concealing the deer and marks a nearby tree with his knife so he can find the spot again. Then he heads toward Nathaniel's homestead, moving as quickly as the rough terrain allows. Nathaniel's place is more established than Thomas's, a slightly larger cabin with a proper stone chimney instead of a stick and mud one. A small field has been cleared from the forest, now fallow for winter but ready for spring planting. Smoke rises from the chimney, a welcome sight in the wilderness. Nathaniel, Thomas calls as he approaches, knowing better than to surprise anyone out here. People tend to shoot first and check identities later. The cabin door opens and Nathaniel steps out, rifle in hand but pointed down. He's older than Thomas, maybe 40, with a full beard and the weathered look of someone who's spent years outdoors. "Thomas?" he nods in greeting. "Little early for digging. Ground still frozen solid." "Got a deer," Thomas explains. "Need help bringing it in. Figured we could do that, then work on your cellar." Nathaniel's face breaks into a grin. "Well now, that's good news. Sarah," he calls back into the cabin. "Thomas got a deer. We'll be back with meat," a woman's voice acknowledges from inside. Nathaniel grabs his coat and hat. "Where'd you drop it?" "North Ridge, maybe half-mile." As they walk, Thomas mentions the native hunter he saw. Nathaniel listens carefully. "Probably Shawnee," he says. "Been seeing them more often lately. Hunting party, most likely. Not war party. They'd have looked different." "Friendly?" Thomas asks. Nathaniel shrugs. "Not unfriendly. They know we're here. We know they're here. Long as we don't cause trouble. They probably won't either, but keep your rifle handy, just the same." When they reach the deer, both men work quickly to hoist it onto a makeshift travois Nathaniel brought. 2 long poles with a hide stretched between them. Dragging it is still work, but manageable between 2 men. "Good size," Nathaniel comments, examining the deer. "Fat, too. Been eating well before winter set in proper." They drag the deer back to Thomas's cabin first. Mary comes out when she hears them approach, her face lighting up at the sight of the deer. "Oh, thank the Lord," she says, hand on her belly. "Got lucky," Thomas says, though they all know luck had little to do with it. Skill and persistence, more like. "I'll help you hang and skin it," Nathaniel offers. "Then we can see about that root cellar." The men hang the deer from a stout tree branch near the cabin. Skinning a deer properly takes time. You want to keep the hide intact for tanning. Nothing goes to waste. The meat will be cut into strips for drying, ground for sausage, or preserved in various ways. The hide will become clothing or blankets. The sinew will be used for sewing, the bones for tools, or boiled for broth. Even the hooves can be used to make glue. As they work, Nathaniel asks, "You set for winter, Thomas?" It's a loaded question on the frontier. No one is ever truly set for winter. There's always more you could have done, more you should have stored, more preparations you could have made. Getting there, Thomas answers diplomatically. "This deer helps. Got corn enough, I think. Firewood's good. It's Mary I worry about." He glances toward the cabin where his wife has gone back inside. Nathaniel nods understandingly. "Sarah says she'll come when it's time. She's delivered 6 babies out here, not counting our own 3. This reassurance helps, but only somewhat. Childbirth on the frontier is terrifyingly dangerous. No doctors, no hospitals, no medicines beyond herbal remedies of questionable effectiveness. If something goes wrong, Thomas stops the thought before it fully forms. Appreciate that," he says simply. By midday, the deer is properly dressed and the meat secured. Some cuts are already smoking over a small fire Thomas built, while others hang in the cold air to age for a few days before preservation. They've separated out portions for Nathaniel's family as payment for his help. Another example of frontier economics. Now they turn to the work at Nathaniel's homestead. The root cellar is half dug, a pit that will eventually be lined with stone and topped with a heavy door. Root cellars are essential for frontier survival, a naturally cool, consistent place to store vegetables, preserves, and even some meat through the winter months. Gotta get at least 3 feet down, Nathaniel explains, below the frost line, otherwise everything in there will freeze and thaw until it rots. The digging is brutal work. The ground is already partially frozen, and each shovelful requires maximum effort. Both men are soon sweating despite the cold air, their breath coming in white clouds as they labour. Heard from Jenkins last week, Nathaniel says between shovelfuls. Says there's 20 new families settled over in the Ohio country this year. 20? Thomas is surprised. That's a veritable population explosion for the frontier. Yep. Government's offering land cheap, $1 an acre, I heard. This is the rhythm of frontier expansion. First, the lone pioneers like Thomas and Nathaniel, then a trickle of settlers, then a flood as word spreads of opportunity. Soon there will be a proper town, then another further west as people like Thomas decide it's getting too crowded and move on. Gonna be neighbours everywhere before long, Nathaniel continues. Won't be able to spit without hitting someone's cabin. Thomas isn't sure how he feels about this. Part of him came west for the solitude, the chance to build something from nothing without interference. Another part recognizes the safety and community that comes with numbers. Wonder what the Shawnee think of that, Thomas muses. Nathaniel's expression darkens. Nothing good, I'd wager. 20 families means 20 rifles, but it also means 20 times the hunting, 20 times the trees cut down. Think there'll be trouble? Always is, eventually. Nathaniel drives his shovel into the hard earth with extra force. Always is. They work until the light begins to fade. The root cellar isn't finished, but it's significantly deeper. Another day's work should complete it. Both men are exhausted, muscles aching from the labour. Come in for some stew before you head back, Nathaniel offers. Sarah always makes too much. The inside of Nathaniel's cabin is similar to Thomas's, but with the lived-in feel of a place that's been occupied longer. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl ranging from about 4 to 10 years old, sit at a table doing lessons from a worn primer. Sarah, a thin woman with a perpetually worried expression, stirs a large pot over the fire. Smells good, Thomas says, removing his hat. Or rabbit and whatever vegetables we had left, Sarah explains. Stretch it with cornmeal, goes further that way. The meal is simple, but filling, exactly what's needed after a day of physical labour. Thomas eats gratefully, aware that sharing food is no small gesture on the frontier where everyone lives close to the edge of hunger. As promised, Nathaniel sends Thomas home with a small sack of cornmeal. For Mary, he says, tell her Sarah will be by tomorrow to check on her. The walk back to his own cabin is tense. Darkness is falling rapidly, and Thomas is acutely aware of every sound in the forest around him. A branch cracking might be a deer, or something hunting deer, something hunting him. The relief when his cabin comes into view is palpable. A warm glow from the single window tells him Mary has kept the fire going. He quickens his pace for the last 100 yards. Inside, Mary has made the small cabin as comfortable as frontier life allows. The fire burns steadily, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. She's hung the rabbit fur from this morning to dry and has been working on a small gown for the baby, using fabric from one of her old dresses. "You're late," she says, but there's no accusation in it. Just the relief of a woman whose husband has returned safely from the dangerous world outside. Deer took time, then the digging. Thomas sets down his rifle and the sack of cornmeal. Nathaniel says Sarah will visit tomorrow. Mary nods, one hand automatically going to her belly. Good, I've been feeling different, heavier. Thomas doesn't know what to say to this. The approaching birth looms large in both their minds, a combination of joy and terror. Instead, he sits beside her and places his hand on her stomach, feeling the strong movements of the child within. "Strong," he says again, like his pa. "Or stubborn like his ma," Mary completes their ritual exchange, smiling despite her exhaustion. Outside, the wind picks up, whistling through the chinks in the cabin walls. The temperature is dropping rapidly with the darkness. Another cold night ahead. "I'll bank the fire," Thomas says, moving to prepare the hearth for overnight. Banking coals properly means having fire in the morning without having to start from scratch, a critical skill when matches don't exist, and starting a fire means flint, steel, and patience. As they prepare for bed, the same bed they woke in that morning, Thomas takes a moment to look around their small cabin. It's not much. Dirt floor, rough furniture, drafty walls, but it's theirs. Every log placed by his hands, every inch of it representing freedom from tenant farming, from working another man's land, from the crowded conditions back east. Was it worth it? Mary asks quietly, reading his thoughts as she often does. Thomas looks at her, at the home they've made, at the future growing in her belly. "Ask me in spring," he says with a small smile, "after we've survived winter." They settle into bed together, pulling the thin blankets and furs around them as the temperature continues to drop outside. Tomorrow will bring the same challenges: food, firewood, preparation for winter, the constant vigilance required to stay alive in a place that can kill you 100 different ways. But tomorrow is tomorrow. For now, they have shelter, food in their bellies, and each other. On the American frontier, that's as close to security as anyone can hope for. The last thing Thomas does before sleep claims him is reach out to touch his rifle, making sure it's within easy reach, just in case, always just in case. James Harper stands at the bow of the flatboat, squinting against the morning sun as it sparkles off the Ohio River. At 26, he's the spitting image of his father Thomas. Same broad shoulders, same stubborn jaw, same reckless hope pushing him westward. But the frontier James faces in 1824 isn't the dense Appalachian wilderness his father conquered. It's a different beast entirely. Pa would have laughed at this, James thinks, watching the parade of boats drifting downriver, called it too damn crowded, and it is, compared to the isolation Thomas and Mary endured. The Ohio River is America's first superhighway, a liquid road carrying humanity westward. Keel boats, flatboats, and the occasional early steamboat create a floating migration of dreamers, schemers, and desperate souls looking for something better than what they left behind. James. Sarah Harper's voice cuts through his thoughts. Emma's gotten into the flour again. James turns to see his wife holding their squirming 3-year-old daughter, her face and dress covered in white powder. Behind them, their flatboat is a hive of cramped activity. Thomas Jr., 16 and sullen about leaving his friends back in Pennsylvania, is checking the steering oar. Elizabeth, their 12-year-old, feeds scraps to the 2 chickens they've brought along, and 6-year-old William is doing what William always does, asking questions nobody can answer. But why does the river bend here, and how deep is it? Could a fish big enough to eat our boat live in there? Pa, are there river monsters? James scoops up Emma, who giggles and leaves ghostly flower handprints on his shirt. No river monsters, Will, just catfish the size of small children who don't listen to their mothers. William's eyes go wide. Really? No, not really, Sarah sighs, taking Emma back. Your father thinks he's funny. "I'm hilarious," James says with a wink to William. "Just ask anyone." The reality is, this journey terrifies him more than he'll admit. Everything they own is on this crude vessel, a floating platform of rough-hewn planks with a small shelter in the centre where they sleep. All their possessions, their livestock, their hopes. One wrong move, one hidden snag or sandbar, and they could lose it all. Think of it like the worst possible moving day. You've got your spouse, 4 kids, 2 dogs, 3 chickens, and literally everything you own crammed onto a homemade raft that's essentially just a floating shed. Now navigate that down a river with unpredictable currents. Other boats trying not to hit you, and oh yeah, no engine. Just a couple of long poles and a steering oar, and you have to live on this thing for weeks. Now that's what I call a family vacation. The Mississippi Valley that James has bet their future on isn't the untamed wilderness his father faced, but it's hardly settled either. The Northwest Territory has been carved into states, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, but much of it remains raw, awaiting the plow and the axe. It's the middle stage of America's westward growth, not the first wave of isolated pioneers like Thomas, but not yet the established society that will follow. "Pa, look," William points excitedly. "Another boat?" A larger keelboat passes them, poled upstream against the current by a crew of boatmen, hard, rough men who walk the length of the boat pushing long poles against the riverbed, then walk back to the front and do it again, mile after mile, hour after hour. It's brutal work. "Thank the Lord we're going downstream," Sarah murmurs, watching the straining men. The keelboat crew eyes their flatboat as they pass. One spits a stream of tobacco juice into the river. Another calls out, "Where you headed, farmer?" "Illinois," James answers cautiously. Rivermen have a reputation for hard drinking and harder fighting. The man nods. "Good land there," they say. "If the fever don't get you first." With that cheerful assessment, they continue their backbreaking journey upstream, disappearing around the bend. "What fever, Pa?" William asks immediately. James ruffles his son's hair. "Nothing to worry about, Will, but it is. The fever, whether malaria, typhoid, or any number of other diseases, is a very real threat in the Mississippi Valley. Low-lying areas near rivers breed mosquitoes and contaminated water. Many a hopeful settler has died shivering and delirious before their first crop could be harvested. The day passes slowly, the landscape sliding by like a painting, slowly unrolling. Forests give way to occasional clearings where cabins or small settlements huddle near the riverbank. At midday, they pass a small town, just a cluster of wooden buildings with a few crude docks where boats can tie up. "Should we stop?" Sarah asks, shading her eyes to see better. James considers it. They need supplies, flour to replace what Emma spilled, maybe some salt pork, but stops mean spending the little money they have. Every penny spent now is one less for buying land when they reach Illinois. "We'll stop at Cincinnati," he decides, "another day downstream." Sarah nods, trusting his judgment, even if she might disagree. That's their partnership, forged through 12 years of marriage and the shared work of building a life. Thomas and Mary Harper had taught them that. The frontier demands unity. Divided families don't survive. That night, they moor the flatboat along the shore, driving stakes into the bank to secure it. James and Thomas Jr. collect firewood, while Sarah and Elizabeth prepare a simple meal, cornbread and a stew made from dried beans and the last of a ham they'd brought from Pennsylvania. As darkness falls, other fires appear along the riverbank, other families on other boats, all moving westward with the current. James wonders about their stories, their reasons for pulling up stakes and risking everything on the promise of unseen land. "You think we'll be there soon, Pa?" Thomas Jr. asks as they sit around their small fire on the riverbank. Another week, maybe 2, James answers. Depends on the river, depends on if we run into trouble. What kind of trouble? William asks, always curious. Sandbars, snags, river pirates. James immediately regrets mentioning the last one when he sees Sarah's expression. River pirates? William's eyes are huge now. Very rare, James adds quickly. And they go after merchant boats carrying goods, not family boats like ours, because we have nothing worth stealing, Thomas Jr. mutters. We have everything worth stealing, Sarah corrects him firmly. We have each other. We have our health and our strength. We have the tools to build a new life. That's more than many have. James looks at his wife gratefully. She's right, of course. What they lack in money, they make up for in youth, health, and skills. James can farm, hunt, and work wood. Sarah can spin, weave, preserve food, and a dozen other essential frontier skills. The children are old enough to work alongside them. It's a fortune in capability, if not in coin. Bible says not to store up treasures on earth, James adds. Seems like good advice when you're trying to fit your life on a flatboat. This gets a smile even from Thomas Jr., who's been the hardest to convince about this move. His son had a sweetheart back in Pennsylvania, though he thinks James doesn't know about her. Leaving was especially hard for him. Get some sleep, James tells them all. I'll take first watch and wake me for second, Thomas Jr. offers, surprising James with his volunteerism. The night is alive with sounds, frogs, insects, the occasional splash of something in the river. James sits with his rifle across his knees, watching the moon's reflection ripple on the water. He's not really expecting trouble, but frontier habit runs deep. His father had taught him that vigilance is the tax you pay for survival. Morning comes damp and foggy. They eat a cold breakfast of cornbread, not wanting to rebuild the fire. Time is precious when travelling by river. Every hour of daylight is a few more miles closer to their destination. By mid-morning, the fog has burned away, revealing a river busy with commerce. More boats appear as they approach Cincinnati, from crude rafts like theirs to proper keelboats and the occasional majestic steamboat belching smoke and churning the water. Would you look at that? Sarah breathes as a particularly large steamboat passes them, its paddle wheel throwing spray into the air. It's like seeing a mythical creature, something from stories come to life. Cincinnati itself appears suddenly around a bend, a proper city with brick buildings, church steeples, and a waterfront crowded with vessels of all descriptions. The noise hits them first, human voices, animal sounds, the clanging of metal on metal from blacksmith shops, the hiss and roar of steamboat engines. My God, James murmurs, it's grown. He'd passed through Cincinnati 8 years earlier on a trip with his father, when it had been little more than an overgrown village. Is that where we're going to live? William asks, eyes wide at the bustling scene. No, much further downriver and then west, James explains. This is just a stop. Navigating their unwieldy flatboat through the busy harbour is nerve-wracking. Larger vessels have little patience for families like theirs, and more than once they have to pole frantically to avoid being crushed by a steamboat or trading schooner. Watch where you're going, you damn fool, a man on a keelboat shouts as they narrowly avoid collision. Sorry, James calls back, face burning with embarrassment. He's a good farmer, but a novice boatman at best. They find a spot to tie up, paying a small fee to a harbour master who looks at their homemade craft with barely disguised contempt. Cincinnati may be a frontier city by Eastern standards, but it has its own hierarchies and snobberies already. Stay with the boat, James tells Thomas Jr. Your mother and I will get supplies. Can I come? William begs. Please? James looks at Sarah, who nods. You can come, but you stay right with us. No wandering off. The Cincinnati waterfront is a shock to their senses after weeks on the river. Crowds of people push past, rivermen in rough clothes, merchants in finer garb, women in dresses much more fashionable than Sarah's homespun, children running errands or playing in the streets. And the smells, wood smoke and horse manure, fresh bread from bakeries, the reek of fish from the market, tobacco, whiskey from numerous taverns, unwashed bodies, tar and hemp rope from the shipyards. It's overwhelming after the clean air of the river. William clings to James's hand, suddenly shy in the face of so much humanity. There's so many people, he whispers. Wait until you see New Orleans, a passing riverman laughs, overhearing. This here's just a village compared to that. They make their way to a general store where James trades some of their precious coins for flour, salt, coffee, and a few other necessities. The prices are higher than back home, and he winces as he counts out the money. Highway robbery, he mutters to Sarah. Supply and demand, the shopkeeper says with a shrug. Everything headed west costs more because that's where everyone's going. On their way back to the boat, they pass a man selling newspapers. James hesitates, then spends a penny on one. News is as much a necessity as salt in the isolated places they're headed. Waste of money, Sarah says, but without heat. She knows James's hunger for information. President election coming up, James defends himself. Adams against Jackson, should know who'll be running the country we're helping build. Back at the boat, they find Thomas Jr. in conversation with a man in a reasonably respectable coat. Not a riverman, but some sort of merchant by the look of him. "Pa, this is Mr. Davidson," Thomas Jr. says as they approach. "He was asking about our plans." James immediately feels a prickle of suspicion. The frontier breeds wariness of strangers, especially well-dressed ones asking personal questions. James Harper, he introduces himself with cautious politeness. "This is my wife Sarah." Or Robert Davidson. The man offers his hand. "Land agent, I couldn't help noticing your flatboat and family. Headed to Illinois, your boy tells me?" "That's right." "Whereabouts?" James hesitates. There's no reason not to answer, but frontier caution runs deep. "Sangamon River country. Heard the soil's good there?" Davidson nods approvingly. "It is indeed, rich and black as coffee. I happen to represent several landowners in that very region who have prime parcels available for immediate settlement." Now James understands. Not a threat, just a salesman. "We're looking to claim unimproved land, government land." Davidson's smile doesn't waver, but his eyes cool slightly. "No commission to be made here?" "Ah, well, that's certainly an option, though you should know the best lands near waterways are already claimed, and unimproved land means months of backbreaking work before you can even plant a crop." "I'm not afraid of work, Mr. Davidson." "Of course not. No one travelling as you are could be." Davidson tips his hat. "Good day to you, Mr. Harper, Mrs. Harper. Perhaps we'll meet again in Illinois." As he walks away, Sarah gives James a look. Land agent, my foot, probably a speculator. She's likely right. Land speculation is rampant on the frontier. Men buy up large tracts of government land cheap, then sell smaller parcels at inflated prices to families like theirs. Some are honest businessmen, others a little better than swindlers selling swampland as farmland to Easterners who don't know any better. "Let's get moving," James says. "I want to be downriver before dark." They cast off again, rejoining the flow of boats headed west and south. The current seems faster here, carrying them more swiftly toward their destination. Or maybe it's just James's imagination, his eagerness to reach their new home and begin the real work of building a life. That night, moored once again along the riverbank, James unfolds the newspaper and reads by firelight while the others sleep. News from Washington about the upcoming election, reports from the eastern cities about commerce and industry, a small article about conflicts with Indians in the Illinois territory that makes him frown with concern. A hand touches his shoulder and he looks up to find Sarah awake, watching him. "Anything interesting?" she asks softly, not wanting to wake the children. Jackson's still popular with the common folk, Adams with the merchants and landowners. He hesitates. "And there's been some trouble with the Kickapoo near where we're headed." Sarah sighs. "There's always trouble somewhere, James. We knew that coming in." It's true. The frontier is defined by conflict between settlers and natives, between farmers and speculators, between civilization and wilderness. His father had faced it. Now it's his turn. "We'll be fine," he assures her, folding the paper. "We're Harpers, after all." Sarah smiles at that. "Yes, and Harpers are too stubborn to fail. Your father taught you that." Among other things, James puts another small log on the fire. "Get some sleep. I'll wake Thomas for his watch soon." But after Sarah returns to their makeshift shelter, James sits a while longer, watching the river flow by, black and mysterious in the darkness. He thinks of his father, who died 5 years ago after a hard but ultimately successful life in the wilderness he'd tamed. Thomas Harper had turned that crude cabin into a proper farm, raised 3 children to adulthood, and even lived to see grandchildren born. Now James is following his path westward, but under very different circumstances. The frontier his father knew, isolated, primal, untouched, is already fading. This new frontier is a place of rapid change, of speculation and development, of systems and governments extending their reach ever further. Is there still room for a family like his? Still a chance to claim a piece of land and make it truly their own? "Only one way to find out," James murmurs to himself, banking the fire for the night. The next morning dawns clear and cool. They make good time, the river carrying them steadily southward. Around midday, William, who's appointed himself lookout at the bow, calls out excitedly, "Papa, look!" James joins him, following his pointing finger to where the Ohio River meets the Mississippi in a turbulent confluence of currents. It's an awesome sight, the relatively clear waters of the Ohio joining the muddy, massive flow of the Mississippi, 2 great arteries of the continent merging into one. "That's it," James says quietly. "The great river." William Harper wipes sweat from his eyes and squints at the endless prairie stretching before him. At 32, he's no longer the curious little boy who peppered his father with questions about river monsters. Now he's the one with children asking impossible questions. Questions like, "Are we there yet?" and "Why did we leave Illinois?" And the hardest one of all, is Ma going to die like the Stevens woman? The year is 1845, and William Harper is part of something unprecedented in American history, a massive migration of ordinary people traveling 2,000 miles across a continent. The Oregon Trail isn't just a pathway, it's a river of humanity flowing westward, carrying wagons, livestock, hopes and fears toward the promised land of Oregon Territory. "How many wagons you figure are ahead of us, Mr. Harper?" asks Daniel Preston, a former blacksmith from Ohio who's travelled alongside the Harpers since Independence, Missouri. William shakes his head. 100, maybe more. Trail's busy this year. Busy is an understatement. Word has spread east about the fertile Willamette Valley where rain falls generously and the soil grows anything you plant, where a man can claim 640 acres, an entire square mile, for nothing but the courage to get there and the strength to work it. A stark contrast to the increasingly crowded Illinois, where William's farm had grown too small to support his growing family. Pa. 7-year-old Thomas runs up, his face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Wilson says there's buffalo ahead." William nods to his son. "Tell your ma I'll be back. Going to check." He strides forward past several wagons where men walk alongside oxen and women carry infants or toddlers too tired to walk further today. Everyone looks exhausted. They've been on the trail for 8 weeks now, and the initial excitement has long since faded into the grinding routine of dawn to dusk travel. At the front of their wagon train, William finds James Wilson, their elected captain, standing in his stirrups and peering through a spyglass. "Buffalo?" William asks without preamble. Wilson hands him the glass. "See for yourself. About 2 miles out, looks like." William focuses the spyglass and feels his heart quicken. There they are, dark shapes grazing the distant prairie, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. A sight his grandfather Thomas would have given an arm to witness. "We hunting?" William asks, handing back the glass. Wilson hesitates. "Need the meat, that's certain, but a hunt means stopping early, delaying our schedule." "Schedule?" William can't keep the edge from his voice. "We're already behind because of the sickness." The sickness? Cholera had swept through their company 2 weeks earlier, killing 4 people and leaving a dozen more weakened. They'd lost precious days burying the dead and waiting for the ill to recover or die. Wilson's jaw tightens. "I'm well aware, Harper, but every day we delay means less time to build shelter before winter in Oregon. Won't matter if we starve getting there." The 2 men stare at each other. There's been tension between them since independence. Wilson is a businessman who runs the wagon train like a military company, all schedules and rules. William, like his father and grandfather before him, bristles under such authority. Finally, Wilson sighs. "Fine, we'll make early camp. Tell the men to ready their rifles." William nods. A small victory won. Fresh meat means strength, means survival. The dried beef and hardtack they've been eating won't sustain them through the mountains ahead. As he walks back to his wagon, William passes Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman travelling with her merchant husband to Oregon. She's struggling with a water barrel that's come loose from their wagon. "Here," William stops to help, easily lifting the heavy barrel back into place. "Thank you," she says with a slight accent. "My husband, he check on oxen." William secures the barrel with a length of rope. "Buffalo ahead, we're making camp early to hunt." Mrs. Chen's face brightens. "Fresh meat I make, good stew. You bring some." "Yes, ma'am," William promises with a smile. He's come to appreciate Mrs. Chen's cooking, so different from anything he's tasted before. That's one unexpected benefit of the trail, meeting people from places he'd only heard of in stories. The Oregon Trail doesn't just connect east and west, it mixes people who'd never otherwise meet. William's wagon company includes farmers from 6 different states, a German family who barely speaks English, the Chinese merchant couple, a doctor from Boston, and a group of single men heading to Oregon to seek their fortunes. They all left different lives behind, but out here they're united by a common purpose and common dangers. Back at his own wagon, William finds his wife Rebecca tending to their youngest, 3-year-old Sarah, who's developed a worrying cough in the past few days. "How is she?" he asks, laying a hand on the child's forehead. "No fever, thank God." "Better, I think." Rebecca looks exhausted, dark circles under her eyes from nights spent watching over their daughter. The willow bark tea seems to help. Rebecca Harper is 30, her once smooth face now weathered by sun and wind. She hadn't wanted to leave Illinois, hadn't wanted to risk their 4 children on this dangerous journey, but she'd agreed because she trusted William, just as his mother had trusted his father, and his grandmother had trusted his grandfather. 3 generations of Harper women following their men into the wilderness. "Buffalo ahead," William tells her. "We're stopping early to hunt." Relief washes over Rebecca's face. They haven't had fresh meat in nearly 2 weeks. The men are organising now. "I'll go after I check the wagon." William inspects their wagon carefully, a daily ritual. The wheels take the most punishment, rattling loose over the rough trail. He tightens the iron tyre on the left rear wheel, which has developed a worrying wobble. Then he checks the axles, the tongue, the canvas cover that protects their possessions from sun and rain. This wagon is their entire world now. It carries everything they own, from cooking pots to family heirlooms. If it breaks beyond repair, they'd have to abandon most of their possessions by the trail, as others have already done. The Oregon Trail is littered with discarded furniture, books, even family pianos. Things thought essential back east that become unbearable burdens when oxen start to weaken or wagon wheels start to crack. So the hunting party sets out, 12 men with rifles, William among them. They approach the buffalo herd cautiously, downwind. These animals may look like lumbering mountains of meat, but they can run faster than horses when startled. "Remember," Wilson whispers as they near the herd, "we need the meat, not the thrill. Clean shots only." William resists, rolling his eyes, as if he needs instruction on hunting from a former dry goods merchant. When they're within range, the men spread out and take aim. William selects a young bull away from the main herd. He takes a deep breath, steadies his rifle against his shoulder, and squeezes the trigger. The rifle's crack is joined by others, and suddenly the prairie erupts with noise and movement. The herd panics, thundering away in a cloud of dust, but several animals lie still on the grass. William's bull is down, shot clean through the heart. Pride swells in his chest. He's provided for his family, just as the Harper men always have. It takes the rest of the day to butcher the animals and transport the meat back to camp. The entire company comes alive with activity. Women preparing for smoking and drying most of the meat while cooking choice cuts for dinner. Children gather wood for the many fires needed. Even the elderly help, rendering fat for future use. That night, the mood in camp is lighter than it's been in weeks. Stomachs are full, and the knowledge that they'll have meat for days lifts everyone's spirits. Someone produces a fiddle, and impromptu dancing breaks out in the center of their circled wagons. William sits with Rebecca and their children, watching the celebration. Thomas and 11-year-old Emma have joined the dancing, while Rebecca holds sleeping Sarah. Their middle child, 9-year-old James, named for his grandfather, leans against William's side. "Pa, tell about when Grandpa came west," James asks, a frequent request. "Again? You've heard it 100 times. Please? I like the part about the river pirates." William chuckles. "There weren't really river pirates. Your grandpa just liked to make the story exciting, but he tells it anyway. How James and Sarah Harper had loaded everything they owned onto a flatboat and floated down the Ohio River. How they'd fought the Mississippi's current and eventually bought a wagon to reach the Illinois country. He embellishes a bit, as his father had, because that's what Harper men do. They turn hardship into legend. Your grandpa would have loved this, William says, gesturing to the vast prairie around them. He always wanted to see what was beyond the next hill. That's what you always say too, Rebecca points out with a smile. Harper blood, William shrugs. Can't fight it. As the dancing continues, Dr. Elliot from Boston makes his way over to check on little Sarah. Breathing sounds better, he says after listening to her chest. Keep up with the willow bark tea and try to keep her out of the dust as much as possible. William nods gratefully. Having a doctor in their company has already saved lives, including possibly his daughter's. Not every wagon train is so fortunate. What about the mountains, Doc? William asks quietly, not wanting the children to hear. Will she be strong enough? The doctor's expression turns grave. They're still on the plains, but the Rocky Mountains loom in their future. High passes where the air is thin and the nights freezing cold, even in summer. Let's get her fully recovered first, Dr. Elliot says diplomatically. Then worry about the mountains. After the doctor moves on, Rebecca leans close to William. We could winter at Fort Laramie, she suggests. Many companies do. Continue in the spring when she's stronger. William shakes his head. Wintering costs money we don't have, and it means arriving in Oregon after the best land is claimed. They've had this argument before, the eternal tension between safety and opportunity. William understands his wife's fears. 4 children have died on the trail so far, 2 from accidents and 2 from disease. But turning back or delaying isn't an option. The Harpers have always moved forward. Morning comes cruelly early on the Oregon Trail. By first light, the camp is already stirring. Fires being lit, breakfast cooking, oxen being hitched to wagons. The trail allows no lazy mornings, no slow starts. Every day of travel matters. As William helps load their wagon, Thomas runs up, face pale. "Pa, come quick, the Chen wagon." William follows his son to where a crowd has gathered around the Chinese couple's wagon. Mr. Chen is sitting on the ground, holding his leg and grimacing in pain. "Broke it," Dr. Elliot explains as William approaches. Wagon wheel caught a rut and tipped, fell under it. A broken leg on the Oregon Trail is potentially a death sentence. A man who can't walk, can't lead his oxen, can't hunt, can't care for his wagon. What will they do? William asks, though he already knows the answer. In most cases, a family with a seriously injured member has to turn back or risk death. "We go on," Mrs. Chen says firmly, standing beside her husband. "I drive wagon." A murmur runs through the gathered crowd. A woman driving a wagon alone. It happened occasionally out of necessity, but rarely by choice. "Mrs. Chen," Wilson begins gently, "perhaps you should consider—" "No," she cuts him off. "We sell everything in China to come here. No go back." William finds himself admiring her determination. It reminds him of stories about his grandmother Mary, who'd given birth in a crude cabin in the wilderness with only a neighbor woman to help. "I'll drive with her," he finds himself saying, "at least until Mr. Chen can manage again." Rebecca gives him a look. They both know this means splitting their family temporarily. She'll have to manage their wagon and children alone, just until Fort Laramie, William adds. By then he might be able to handle the reins himself. So it's decided. The Chens will continue, with William helping drive their wagon. It means more work for everyone, but on the Oregon Trail, you help your neighbors. Not out of charity, but survival. Today, the Chens need help. Tomorrow, it might be the Harpers. As they set out that morning, William walking alongside the Chen's oxen, he thinks about how different this journey is from those of his father and grandfather. Thomas Harper had faced true wilderness, isolated and untamed. James Harper had navigated the early transportation networks of rivers and crude roads. But William is part of a massive, organized migration. The Oregon Trail isn't wilderness anymore. It's a highway of sorts with established stopping points, river crossings, even trading posts along the way. The challenges are different now. Not isolation, but disease spreading through crowded camps. Not navigating unknown terrain, but managing the logistics of moving thousands of people across a continent. 3 days later, they reach the Platte River, wide, shallow, and treacherous with quicksand. This crossing has claimed wagons, livestock, and human lives, but there's no way around it. The company stops to assess the challenge. Some want to cork their wagons and float them across, as they'd heard other trains had done. Others, including Wilson, favor building rafts for their possessions and walking the livestock through the shallows. I've seen too many wagons swept away trying to float them, William argues at the leaders' meeting. The Platte looks calm, but it's unpredictable. In the end, they choose the rafting approach. It's slower, but safer. The next 3 days are consumed with dismantling wagons, building crude rafts, ferrying possessions across, then reassembling everything on the far bank. It's exhausting, dirty work, but they don't lose a single person or wagon. Small victories on the Oregon Trail are celebrated like major triumphs. That night, despite their exhaustion, spirits are high around the campfires. "Crossed the Platte without drowning," exclaims Daniel Preston, raising a tin cup of coffee. "I call that a good day's work." William nods in agreement, sipping from his own cup. His muscles ache from the labour, but it's a satisfying kind of pain, the kind that means progress. Rebecca joins him, little Sarah asleep in her arms. "How's Mr. Chen?" Better. Doc says the bone's setting clean, no sign of infection." "Good." She sits beside him on a fallen log. "The children miss you at our wagon." "I know, not much longer." William puts an arm around her shoulders. "How's Sarah's cough?" "Almost gone. Dr. Elliot says the worst is past." One more worry eased, but on the Oregon Trail, new worries always replace the old ones. The mountains still lie ahead, and beyond them the hot, dry deserts of the Snake River country, and always the invisible threat of disease lurking in crowded camps and contaminated water. A commotion near the edge of camp draws their attention. A rider has arrived, a scout from another wagon train ahead of them on the trail. Wilson brings the man to the central fire so everyone can hear his news. The scout looks exhausted, his horse lathered with sweat. "Cholera's broken out bad at Fort Laramie," he announces without preamble. 20 dead already, fort's quarantined." A stunned silence falls over the camp. Fort Laramie had been their next major milestone, a place to rest, restock supplies, perhaps even mail letters back east. "How far does the quarantine extend?" Dr. Elliot asks. 5 miles in all directions, the scout answers. "They're turning away all wagon trains." "Is there a way around?" Wilson demands. "North route adds about 40 miles. South is shorter but rougher terrain." The discussion explodes around the fire. Which route to take? Whether to wait until the quarantine lifts? How to handle their dwindling supplies without the expected restocking at the fort? William sits quietly, processing the news. Cholera is the spectre that haunts every wagon train. It strikes without warning, killing within hours. Healthy people at breakfast can be dead by dinner, and it spreads like wildfire through crowded camps. Rebecca's hand finds his, squeezing tightly. They're both thinking of their children, especially Sarah, still recovering from her illness. "We should take the north route," William says, loud enough to cut through the chatter. 40 extra miles is better than risking cholera." Several voices agree, but Wilson looks troubled. "That puts us a week behind schedule, maybe more." "Schedule?" William feels his temper rising again. "What good is a schedule if we're all dead from cholera?" "He's right," Dr. Elliot supports him. "I've seen cholera outbreaks. We want no part of it." The debate continues for hours, but eventually the north route wins out. They'll leave at first light, making a wide berth around Fort Laramie and its deadly outbreak. That night, as William lies beside Rebecca in their wagon, sleep eludes him. The children are all asleep, Thomas and James on the floor of the wagon, Emma and Sarah on the small bed they share with Rebecca. William usually sleeps under the wagon, but tonight, with the news of cholera, he wants to be close to his family. "Are we doing the right thing?" he whispers to Rebecca, unsure if she's still awake. "Coming to Oregon, you mean?" Her voice is equally soft. All of it, leaving Illinois, bringing the children on this journey, risking everything. Rebecca is silent for a long moment. My mother asked my father the same question when they moved from Virginia to Kentucky, and I imagine your grandmother asked your grandfather when they built that first cabin in the wilderness. William smiles in the darkness. Harper women always following their foolish men into danger. Not following, Rebecca corrects him. Walking beside, there's a difference. He reaches for her hand, finding comfort in her touch. We'll make it, won't we? We're Harpers, she says simply, too stubborn to fail. It's his father's phrase, and hearing it from his wife's lips makes William's chest tighten with emotion. 3 generations of Harpers, each pushing the frontier further west, each facing different challenges but driven by the same dream, a place of their own, a future for their children. Get some sleep, Rebecca murmurs. Long day tomorrow. William closes his eyes, listening to the night sounds of the camp, crickets chirping, livestock shifting restlessly, the occasional cough or murmur from nearby wagons. The Oregon Trail has its own lullaby, a symphony of humanity on the move. Tomorrow they'll turn north, avoiding Fort Laramie and its cholera outbreak. They'll face new terrain, unexpected challenges, but they'll face them together, this community of strangers bound by a common destination. As sleep finally claims him, William's last thought is of the land waiting for them in Oregon, 640 acres of fertile soil where the Harper family will put down roots again, land where his children will grow up, where perhaps his grandchildren will be born, unless, of course, the frontier calls them further still. Because Harper blood, as he told his son, can't be denied. It pulls westward, always westward, toward the unknown horizon. William Harper stands knee-deep in the frigid waters of the American River, his back screaming in protest as he straightens. 6 hours of stooping over a wooden cradle, swirling river mud in hopes of finding that telltale yellow glint. 6 hours, and all he has to show for it is a few flakes in his leather pouch that might be worth $1, maybe. This is what I left my family for, he mutters, stretching his aching muscles. It's 1851, and William Harper has joined the greatest gamble in American history, the California Gold Rush. 2 years earlier, he'd successfully brought his family to Oregon's Willamette Valley. They'd claimed their 640 acres, built a cabin, planted crops. Things were going well, then news had filtered north about the rivers of California literally flowing with gold, men finding fortunes in a day that would take a lifetime to earn as a farmer. So William, like thousands of others, had left his established homestead to chase dreams of instant wealth. Just for a season, he'd promised Rebecca. I'll be back before winter with enough gold to buy proper lumber for a real house, maybe even glass windows. Now standing in this crowded river where the easy gold was claimed long ago, he's beginning to doubt his decision. Harper, you deaf? The voice belongs to Josiah Miller, a former Ohio schoolteacher who'd abandoned his classroom for the same golden dreams. Shifts changing. Mackenzie wants us upstream tomorrow. William nods, lifting his cradle from the water. Every foot of this river is claimed by someone, worked in carefully scheduled shifts. The good spots are controlled by companies with dozens of men working around the clock. Individual miners like William and Josiah are left with the less promising areas. The place is already picked over by earlier arrivals. Any luck today? Josiah asks as they trudge up the bank. William holds up his small pouch. Barely worth the effort. Better than me. Got nothing but backache and wet feet. Josiah isn't bitter though. Nobody is really. That's the strange magic of the gold fields. Every day is a fresh lottery. Yesterday's empty pan might be today's bonanza. They make their way back to the mining camp, a chaotic sprawl of tents, crude shanties, and the occasional proper wooden structure housing a saloon or store. What had been empty wilderness 3 years ago is now a makeshift city of 15,000 souls, all focused on a single obsession: gold. Think of the most bizarre music festival you've ever seen, but remove the music, add crushing physical labour, multiply the filth by 10, and drop it in the middle of nowhere with no bathrooms, no police, and absolutely no rules. Now imagine living there for months or years. That's a California mining camp during the gold rush. Mail came, Josiah mentions, as they pass the camp's general store, where prices are 3 times what they'd be back east. Might be something from Oregon. William's heart lifts. Rebecca's letters are his lifeline, his connection to the world he left behind. They arrive sporadically, sometimes 3 at once after weeks of nothing. Inside the crowded store, the proprietor, a shrewd New Yorker named Goldstein, who's made more from selling shovels than most miners have made from using them, waves William over. "Harper letter for you, and that saw you ordered came in, $8. "8? You said 6 last month." Goldstein shrugs unapologetically. "Price went up, supply and demand. You want it or not?" William bites back his frustration. Everything in the goldfields operates on extortion pricing. The miners produce the wealth, but it's men like Goldstein who collect it, selling necessities at whatever price the market will bear. "I'll take it," William finally says, counting out precious coins. He needs the saw for the sluice box he's building with Josiah, a new approach they hope will yield better results than the labour-intensive cradle method. The letter is from Rebecca, dated 6 weeks earlier. William tucks it inside his shirt. He'll read it tonight by firelight, savouring every word, imagining her voice. "Drink?" Josiah suggests, nodding toward the largest tent in camp where tinny piano music competes with drunken shouts. William shakes his head. "Going to work on the sluice before dark. Suit yourself." Josiah ambles off toward the tent, like many miners seeking liquid comfort after a disappointing day. William returns to their campsite, a simple canvas tent they share with 3 other men, all from different states but united by the same golden fever. He retrieves the sluice box materials from beneath his bedroll and sets to work with his new saw. The idea is simple. Instead of processing a pan or cradle of sediment at a time, the sluice will use the river's current to wash larger quantities of gravel over a series of riffles that catch the heavier gold. Less labour, more volume, better chances. That's the theory, anyway. As the evening shadows lengthen, William finally takes a break. The other men have all gone to the saloon tent, leaving him blessedly alone. He settles by their small fire, pulls out Rebecca's letter, and carefully breaks the seal. "My dearest William." Spring has come to our valley. The wheat you planted last fall is knee-high and green as emeralds. Thomas helps with the ploughing and planting every day after school. He's growing so tall, almost a man at 12. Emma has become my right hand with household matters, while James tends the chickens and pigs with surprising responsibility for a boy of 10. Little Sarah asks for you each night before prayers. When is Pa coming home with the gold? She wants to know. The Wilsons have built a proper frame house with the lumber from their sawmill. Mrs. Wilson makes a point of mentioning their glass windows whenever we meet after church services. I smile and say how lovely it must be, though I'd trade 100 glass windows for your return. News from California reaches us in fragments. Some say the gold is gone, others that new discoveries are made daily. I don't know what to believe, except that I miss you terribly and pray for your safe return, with or without golden riches. Your loving wife, Rebecca. William folds the letter carefully and tucks it with the others in his small wooden box of treasures. Guilt gnaws at him. Guilt for leaving, guilt for having so little to show for his absence. The Wilsons with their fine house and glass windows, Mrs. Wilson's smug comments to Rebecca. "I should go home," he says aloud to the empty camp. But even as the words leave his mouth, he knows he won't. Not yet. The dream of striking it rich still burns too brightly. One good find, that's all he needs. One pocket of gold dust or a single nugget the size of his thumb could change everything. The next morning brings a new strategy. William and Josiah, along with their tent mates Erickson, a Swedish immigrant, and Cooper, a former Missouri blacksmith, have pooled their resources to work as a team with their newly completed sluice. "If we each worked alone, we might all find nothing," William explains as they haul the heavy wooden contraption to their claim. "Together we process more gravel, increase our chances." It's sensible, but also a sign of desperation. Solo miners who haven't struck it rich increasingly band together, seeking strength in numbers. Their claim is a 20-foot stretch of riverbank that looked promising during yesterday's survey. The work quickly falls into rhythm. Cooper and Erickson shovel sediment into the sluice's upper end, while William and Josiah monitor the flow, occasionally clearing debris from the riffles. By midday, they've processed more material than William could have managed alone in a week, and results are showing a promising accumulation of black sand and tiny gold flecks in the sluice's traps. "Told you it would work," Josiah crows, eyes bright with renewed hope. At day's end, they carefully collect their take, separating gold from sand using mercury, a dangerous but effective method. The final yield is encouraging, almost an ounce of gold dust between them. Split 4 ways, it's still the best day any of them have had in weeks. "Worth celebrating," Cooper declares. "First round's on me." The main saloon tent is packed with miners unwinding after a day's labour. It's a strange, volatile mix of nationalities and backgrounds. Americans from every state rubbing shoulders with Mexicans, Chileans, Chinese, Europeans, and even a few Australians, all drawn by the same siren call of instant wealth. "It's a regular Tower of Babel," Josiah comments as they push through the crowd toward the bar, a rough plank laid across 2 barrels. The piano player pounds out a lively tune while a woman in a faded red dress sings bawdy lyrics that would scandalize folks back home. Clouds of pipe and cigar smoke hang in the air. At crude tables, men gamble away their day's findings in games of faro, poker, and monte. William orders whiskey, though he's not much of a drinker. It's what men do in the gold fields. Work all day, drink and gamble all night, then rise with the sun to start again. An endless cycle of labour, hope, and usually disappointment. You hear about the strike over at Murphy's diggings? A miner at the bar is talking loudly to his companion. "Fellow hit a pocket yesterday worth $3,000. $3,000 in one damn day." William tries not to listen, tries not to feed the desperate hope such stories inspire. For every true tale of instant riches, there are 100 exaggerations and outright lies. But still, the possibility nags at him. It could happen. It does happen. Why not to him? "To the sluice," Josiah raises his glass in toast. "And to tomorrow being even better than today." They drink to that, a fragile camaraderie born of shared struggle and shared dreams. Later that night, as William lies in their crowded tent, listening to Erickson's snores and Cooper's occasional sleep-talking, he mentally composes a letter to Rebecca. He'll write it tomorrow, tell her about their new sluice and improved prospects. He won't mention the $3,000 strike at Murphy's diggings. Better not to raise false hopes. 2 months pass in much the same pattern. Some days are better than others, but none deliver the fortune William had dreamed of. Their sluice operation expands, becoming more efficient, but the gold seems to be playing a cruel game of diminishing returns. The easy pickings are gone. What remains requires ever more effort to extract. Then rumours begin circulating about a new approach, hydraulic mining. Companies are bringing in massive water cannons to literally wash away entire hillsides, processing tons of material at once. That's the future, Josiah declares after they witness such an operation in action. Our little sluice can't compete with that. It's an awesome, terrifying sight. Hillsides dissolving under pressurized water, ancient trees toppling, the landscape itself being rewritten in mankind's desperate search for gold. The scale of destruction is unlike anything William has ever seen. Doesn't seem right, he murmurs as they watch. Land that took God thousands of years to make, undone in an afternoon. It's progress. Cooper shrugs. Same as the railroads back east cutting through mountains. Man conquering nature. William isn't so sure. The hydraulic operations feel different, not just changing the land, but obliterating it. And for what? Gold that will end up in some banker's vault in San Francisco or New York. As summer gives way to fall, William finally admits what he's been avoiding for months. He's not going to strike it rich. The gold is still here, but it now belongs to the companies with their hydraulic cannons and armies of wage labourers. The day of the independent miner is ending. I'm heading home, he tells his partners one evening. Back to Oregon, back to my family. They don't try to talk him out of it. Many miners are reaching the same conclusion, packing up their meagre possessions and returning to whatever lives they left behind, if those lives still wait for them. Some have been gone for years, chasing an elusive dream while farms foreclosed, businesses failed, and families moved on. What will you tell your wife? Josiah asks as he helps William pack. William pats his leather pouch containing about $60 in gold dust, his total earnings after nearly 8 months of backbreaking labour. The truth that I gambled and lost. Not entirely lost, Josiah points out. $60 is nothing to sneeze at. It's not glass windows and a proper frame house, William sighs. It's not what I promised her. His journey back to Oregon is quieter than the frenzied trip south had been. The roads are filled with men like him, subdued, reflective, most returning with far less than they'd dreamed of. Some won't go home at all, too ashamed to face families after years of broken promises. Along the way, William encounters a wagon train heading south, fresh-faced men with excited chatter about the gold fields. He considers warning them, telling them the brutal truth about what awaits, but he sees the hope in their eyes, the same hope that had driven him, and holds his tongue. Some lessons must be learned firsthand. When he finally crests the hill overlooking their homestead in the Willamette Valley, William pauses to take in the sight. The cabin looks smaller than he remembered, the cleared fields more modest, but smoke rises cheerfully from the chimney, and he can see a figure in the yard. Thomas, surely, though taller than when he left. For a moment, William is gripped by doubt. What if Rebecca resents him for leaving? What if the children have forgotten him? What if they've managed so well without him that his return is an unwelcome disruption? But before these thoughts can take deeper root, Thomas glances up, freezes, then bolts toward the cabin, shouting words William can't quite hear but understands nonetheless. Pa's home. Pa's home. And suddenly the yard is alive with movement. Rebecca emerging from the cabin, Emma and James running from the barn, little Sarah toddling behind trying to keep up with her siblings, all racing toward him as he urges his tired horse down the slope. He dismounts just in time to catch Sarah as she launches herself into his arms. "Did you bring gold, Pa? Did you?" William laughs, the first genuine laugh in longer than he can remember. "Just a little, squirrel, just a little." Rebecca reaches him last, standing slightly apart as the children clamour around him. Her eyes search his face, reading the story of his failure before he can confess it. "You're home," she says simply. "That's all that matters." Later, after the excited chatter of children has been replaced by the deep breathing of sleep, William and Rebecca sit by the fire. He's told her everything, the back-breaking work, the meagre findings, the dashed hopes. "I'm sorry," he concludes, staring into the flames. "I should never have gone." Rebecca is quiet for a long moment. "Maybe not," she finally says, "but you're not the only one. Half the men in our church congregation left for California. Most haven't returned yet. And those who did came back with stories, not gold." She reaches for his hand. "But we survived. The children and I managed the farm. We even expanded the wheat field and added 6 sheep." William looks around their cabin. Still rough-hewn logs, still no glass windows. Not what he'd promised, not what the Wilsons have. "The Wilsons," he begins, "have a pretty house and a miserable marriage," Rebecca interrupts. "Mrs. Wilson may talk about her glass windows, but she never mentions Mr. Wilson's fondness for whiskey or how he treats her when he's had too much." William squeezes her hand gratefully. "Still, I wanted to give you more." "We have enough." Rebecca's voice is firm. "And we have something the gold couldn't buy." "What's that?" "We're Harpers," she says, echoing what had become their family motto, "too stubborn to fail." William smiles, feeling the weight of months of disappointment begin to lift. Yes, the California adventure had been a failure in one sense, but he's home now, with the woman who walks beside him, not behind him, with children who still run to greet him despite his broken promises. With land that produces wheat instead of gold, but feeds his family nonetheless. And as he drifts towards sleep that night, in a real bed instead of a crowded tent, William realizes something important. His grandfather Thomas hadn't found riches in the Appalachian wilderness, nor had his father James on the Illinois prairie. What they'd found was something more valuable. A place to belong, a legacy to build, a future to shape. That, perhaps, is the true gold of the American frontier. Not what can be dug from the ground, but what can be built upon it. Sarah Harper Miller stands at the doorway of her sod house, squinting at the horizon where dark clouds gather. At 26, her face already shows the weathering of prairie life. Skin tanned and lined from sun and wind, hands calloused from work that never ends. She shields her eyes, trying to judge the distance of the storm. "Daniel," she calls, voice carrying across the Kansas prairie to where her husband works the small kitchen garden. "Storm's coming. Better get the animals in." The year is 1874, and Sarah, once the toddling squirrel who asked if her father had brought gold from California, is now a homesteader in her own right. The frontier has shifted again, moving from the timbered valleys of Oregon to the vast treeless expanses of the Great Plains. Daniel Miller nods at his wife's warning, immediately dropping his hoe. On the plains, you don't ignore approaching storms. They can transform from distant clouds to deadly fury in minutes, bringing hail that can destroy a season's crops, or lightning that can incinerate a homestead. "Matthew," Daniel calls to their 7-year-old son, "help me with the chickens." Their homestead is modest, 160 acres claimed under the Homestead Act of 1862, which promised free land to anyone willing to live on it and improve it for 5 years. The Harper family wanderlust had called to Sarah just as it had to her father, grandfather, and great-grandfather before her. When she'd married Daniel 6 years earlier, they'd immediately set their sights on the Kansas prairie, where land was available for nothing but sweat and determination. "Lucy, bring in the washing," Sarah instructs her 5-year-old daughter, who's been playing with a cornhusk doll near the door. "Quick now." As her family scrambles to prepare for the approaching storm, Sarah takes one last look at the horizon. The clouds have that greenish tinge that spells trouble, possibly hail. She sighs, thinking of their struggling corn crop. One bad storm could wipe out months of work. Inside their soddy, as these unique prairie homes are called, Sarah moves efficiently, closing the single window with its precious glass pane, a wedding gift from her parents. The house itself is unlike anything her ancestors built on previous frontiers. With no forests to provide logs, plain settlers use what the land offers, soil itself. Their home is literally cut from the earth, blocks of densely packed prairie sod stacked like bricks with the grass side down. The walls are 3 feet thick, providing excellent insulation against both summer heat and winter cold. The roof is also sod, supported by cottonwood poles hauled from a creek 10 miles away. It's a far cry from the log cabins of Sarah's forebears, but it serves, warm in winter, cool in summer, and, most importantly, almost impossible to burn down on a prairie where fire is a constant threat. The first fat raindrops hit the roof with dull thuds. As Daniel comes through the door, Matthew right behind him. "Chickens and cow are secure," he reports, stomping mud from his boots. "Didn't see any hail yet, but that sky looks mean." Lucy struggles in with an armful of half-dry laundry, and Sarah helps her hang it on the line strung across one corner of their single room. Then she stirs the stew, simmering in the cast-iron pot, hanging over the small fire. With no trees for firewood, they burn twisted bundles of prairie grass and precious dried cow dung, carefully collected and stored. As the storm intensifies outside, the family gathers around their rough-hewn table. Sarah serves the stew, mostly potatoes and onions from their garden, with a small amount of salt pork for flavour. Meat is a luxury, saved for when Daniel can hunt jackrabbits or prairie chickens. "Will the corn survive, Pa?" Matthew asks, voicing the concern on everyone's mind. Daniel glances at Sarah before answering. "We'll know tomorrow. God willing, it's just rain we're getting." But the sharp crack of hail on their sod roof answers his statement. Sarah closes her eyes briefly. Not again. Last year, they'd lost half their crop to hail, forcing them to survive the winter on stores that were already meagre. "We still have the wheat," she says, trying to sound hopeful, "and the garden's small enough that we can cover it next time." This is prairie optimism, acknowledging the disaster at hand while immediately planning for how to mitigate the next one. You can't dwell on losses out here. You can only learn and adapt. "Tell us about Great-Grandpa Thomas again," Lucy requests, changing the subject in the way children do. "The one who built the first cabin?" Sarah smiles, grateful for the distraction. The Harper family stories have become legends passed down through generations, each retelling embellishing certain details while smoothing over others. "Well," she begins, settling into the familiar rhythm of the tale, "Great-Grandpa Thomas Harper was just a young man when he decided to leave Virginia and head into the wilderness beyond the Appalachian Mountains. This was back when there weren't any proper roads, mind you, just Indian trails and deer paths. As Sarah tells the story she's heard countless times from her father, the hail transitions back to rain, drumming steadily on their sod roof. No leaks, a testament to Daniel's careful construction. Many first-time soddies become mud showers during heavy rains, the dirt ceiling literally melting onto everything below. And when winter came, Sarah continues, Great-Grandma Mary was expecting a baby, my grandfather James. They had to survive on whatever Great-Grandpa could hunt and the corn they'd managed to grow that first summer. Like us, Matthew interjects, living off what we grow. Yes, Sarah agrees, though we have neighbours within 5 miles and a town within a day's ride. Great-Grandpa and Great-Grandma were alone in the wilderness, the nearest neighbour half a day's journey away. Daniel, who's heard these stories throughout their marriage, still listens attentively. Your family's always had the pioneer spirit, he comments. 4 generations of pushing westward. Harper blood, Sarah says with a shrug, echoing her father's explanation. Can't fight it. The rain continues through dinner and into the evening. After the children are tucked into their shared bed in the corner, Sarah and Daniel sit by the dying embers of their small fire, speaking in hushed tones. I checked our stores yesterday, Sarah tells him. Even if we lose the corn entirely, we have enough wheat and potatoes to get through winter. It'll be tight, but we won't starve. Daniel nods, his face illuminated by the faint orange glow. At 30, he already looks older, his skin weathered like tanned leather, his hands gnarled from farming the resistant prairie soil. The Wilsons weren't so lucky last winter. Sarah remembers all too well. The Wilson family, no relation to the Wilsons her father had known in Oregon, had arrived on the prairie the same year as them, but a combination of crop failures and illness had forced them to abandon their homestead last winter, returning east in defeat. We won't end up like them, Sarah says firmly. We're Harpers. Well, I am, and you're a Miller, which is just as stubborn. Daniel chuckles softly. That we are. The next morning reveals the storm's damage. Their corn crop is battered but not destroyed, perhaps a 30% loss. The garden fared worse, with young plants shredded by hail. But as Sarah surveys their homestead in the clear morning light, she feels the familiar surge of determination that has carried her family through 4 generations of frontier hardship. We'll replant the garden, she tells Daniel over breakfast. Still time for another crop before fall. He nods, already calculating how to divide their precious saved seeds between immediate replanting and reserves for next year. Every decision on the prairie is a gamble, a wager against future disaster. After breakfast, Sarah walks to the slight rise behind their soddy, where she can see for miles across the gently rolling prairie. The nearest neighbour's home is just visible on the horizon, the Reynolds family with whom they share work during harvest and butchering. Beyond that, the vast emptiness of Kansas stretches to a horizon so flat and distant it seems like the edge of the world. The prairie has a beauty that took Sarah time to appreciate. After growing up in Oregon's verdant valleys, the stark openness of the plains had initially felt exposing, almost threatening. There were no trees to break the relentless wind, no hills to provide perspective or shelter. But over time, she's come to love the subtler beauty of this place, the way the tall grass ripples like water when the wind blows, the wildflowers that appear in explosive colour after spring rains, the endless sky that makes her feel simultaneously tiny and free. A movement catches her eye, a figure on horseback approaching from the direction of town. Sarah shields her eyes, trying to identify the rider. "Daniel," she calls, turning back toward the soddy. "Someone's coming." Her husband emerges, also shading his eyes against the morning sun. Mail carrier looks like. This is a rare event. Mail comes irregularly to their isolated homestead, perhaps once a month when someone from town happens to be traveling in their direction. Sarah feels a flutter of anticipation, perhaps news from her parents or brothers back in Oregon. The rider arrives, a young man barely out of his teens who makes a circuit of the county's scattered homesteads. "Morning, Mrs. Miller, Mr. Miller," he greets them. "Got 2 letters for you, and the newspaper from Topeka." "Thank you, Jimmy," Sarah says, taking the precious items. "Will you stop for coffee?" "Much obliged, ma'am, but I've got a dozen more deliveries before sundown." He tips his hat. "Storm hit you folks hard?" "Damaged some crops, but we'll manage," Daniel answers. "Peterson's over east lost their entire wheat field," Jimmy informs them, "and lightning struck the Andersons' barn, burned it clean to the ground." Sarah winces in sympathy. Fire is the prairie's most terrifying threat, faster than a galloping horse and utterly unstoppable once it builds momentum across the dry grasslands. After Jimmy rides off, Sarah examines their mail, a letter from her parents in Oregon, another from Daniel's sister in Ohio, and a newspaper dated 3 weeks ago. News travels slowly to the frontier, arriving like dispatches from another world. She saves the letters for that evening when the day's work is done and they can savor each word. The newspaper they'll read bit by bit over the coming days, rationing the connection to the wider world like a precious resource. The summer unfolds with the relentless rhythm of prairie life. They replant the garden, nurse the damaged corn, and tend to the wheat that will form the backbone of their winter survival. Each day begins before dawn and ends after sunset, filled with labor that leaves no room for idleness. Then, in late July, a new threat appears. Sarah notices it first, a peculiar darkening on the southern horizon. Not storm clouds this time, but something lower, almost like smoke, but moving with strange, purposeful patterns. "Daniel," she calls from the garden, pointing. "What is that?" He straightens from his work, squinting south. His expression shifts from curiosity to alarm. "Get inside," he says suddenly. "Get the children inside now." "What is it?" Sarah asks, already moving toward the house where Matthew and Lucy are playing. "Grasshoppers," Daniel answers grimly. "Looks like a big swarm." Sarah feels cold dread despite the summer heat. She's heard stories from neighbors about grasshopper plagues. Millions of insects descending like a living storm, devouring everything green in their path. Some homesteaders had lost entire farms in hours, the insects stripping fields to bare earth. Inside the soddy, they close the door and stuff rags under it to keep the insects out. Through their single window, they watch as the horizon grows darker, the strange cloud approaching with terrifying speed. "Will they eat everything, Pa?" Matthew asks, his voice small. Daniel puts his arm around his son's shoulders. "Not everything, buddy, and what they do take, we'll replant." The first grasshoppers arrive with a sound like hail, thousands of small bodies hitting the sod roof and walls. Then comes the eerie rustling, the sound of countless tiny jaws stripping their crops leaf by leaf. Lucy begins to cry, and Sarah holds her close, murmuring reassurances she doesn't entirely feel. For 2 hours, they huddle inside while the insect storm rages around them. When it finally passes, moving northward like a biblical plague, they emerge to assess the damage. It's devastating. The corn is gone. Every stalk stripped to bare stalks. The garden is a ruin of stems and twigs. Even the prairie grass surrounding their homestead has been eaten to nubs. Only the wheat already harvested and stored in their small sod barn has been spared. Sarah stands amid the devastation, Lucy clinging to her skirts, and feels a momentary wave of despair. All their work, all their careful planning undone in an afternoon by a mindless swarm of insects. God's teeth, Daniel mutters, surveying what remains of their corn crop. He rarely swears, especially in front of the children. Nothing left. Sarah takes a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. We still have the wheat, she says, echoing her words from after the hailstorm. We won't starve. Daniel looks at her, his initial shock giving way to the pragmatic determination that frontier life demands. No, we won't starve, and I hear tell the railroads hiring men for track laying could bring in some cash for supplies. The railroad. It's been pushing westward for years, a steel lifeline connecting the isolated frontier to the bustling cities of the east. Now it's approaching their region, bringing with it both opportunity and change. How long would you be gone? Sarah asks, already calculating how she'll manage alone with the children. 3 weeks? Maybe 4? They're working not 30 miles from here. Daniel puts his arm around her. We'll get through this, Sarah. We always do. That evening, after the children are asleep, Sarah reads her parents' letter by candlelight. William and Rebecca Harper are in their 60s now, but still working their Oregon farm. Her brothers Thomas and James have farms nearby, while her sister Emma has married a shopkeeper in Portland. Dearest Sarah, her mother writes, your father says the railroad will reach your part of Kansas soon. He remembers when the first tracks came to Oregon and how it changed everything. Suddenly, the journey that took him months on the Oregon Trail could be made in days. The world shrinks with each rail that's laid. We worry about you with the drought they say is affecting the plains. Your father wanted to enclose money, but I reminded him of your Harper pride. Instead, know that there is always a place for you here in the Willamette Valley, should Kansas prove too harsh. Sarah smiles at her mother's understanding. Yes, Harper pride would make accepting money difficult, but she has no intention of retreating to Oregon, regardless of grasshoppers or drought or winter storms. This homestead is hers and Daniel's, their claim on the future, just as her ancestors had staked their claims on previous frontiers. Daniel leaves for the railroad work 3 days later. Sarah watches him ride away, Matthew and Lucy waving beside her, and then turns back to the tasks at hand. A frontier woman alone must be farmer, hunter, protector, and parent all at once. The days settle into a new rhythm. Sarah rises before dawn to milk their cow and feed the chickens that survived the grasshoppers. She works in what remains of their garden, coaxing new growth from the ravaged soil. She teaches Matthew to set snares for rabbits, adding precious meat to their dwindling stores. And in the evenings, she tells the children stories, not just the Harper family legends, but also tales from the books she'd brought from Oregon. Sarah, unlike many frontier women, had received a proper education. Her father, remembering his own limited schooling, had insisted on it. Now she passes that gift to her children, teaching them to read and write by lamplight after the day's work is done. Will we have a real school someday? Lucy asks one evening. Yes, Sarah promises. The town's growing. They're talking about building a schoolhouse next year. This is the paradox of frontier life. While Sarah values the independence and open spaces, she also longs for the institutions of civilization. Schools, churches, proper doctors. The same railroad that threatens to end the isolation she partly cherishes will bring these benefits she desperately wants for her children. One night in early September, Sarah wakes to a strange orange glow through their single window. She's instantly alert, heart pounding. Fire, the prairie settler's nightmare. She rushes outside in her nightdress to see the western horizon alive with flames. A prairie fire, moving fast, driven by the constant wind. Still miles away, but headed their direction. Sarah doesn't panic. They've prepared for this, as all prairie homesteaders must. She wakes the children, getting them dressed quickly. "Is it going to burn our house, Ma?" Lucy asks, eyes wide with fear. "No, sweetheart, our house is made of earth, remember? It can't burn." Sarah projects confidence she doesn't entirely feel. The soddy itself might survive, but their barn, their wheat stores, their garden, their very livelihood could all be lost. Working by the eerie orange light of the approaching fire, Sarah harnesses their mule to the plough. With Matthew helping guide the animal, she ploughs a fire break, a strip of turned earth around their homestead where the fire will find no fuel. It's work normally requiring a man's strength, but frontier women develop muscles where they need them. Sarah drives the plough through the tough prairie sod, widening the defensive ring around their home as the fire draws nearer. Her back and arms scream with the effort, but she continues, knowing their survival depends on completing the firebreak before the flames arrive. Matthew, only 7 but already understanding the gravity of their situation, works alongside her without complaint. By the time the fire reaches them, they've created a barrier of bare earth 50 feet wide around their buildings. Sarah stands with her children, watching as the flames reach their firebreak and hunt for fuel that isn't there. The fire splits, flowing around their protected island like water around a stone. The heat is intense, the roar deafening. Embers float on superheated air, and Sarah swats them down before they can ignite anything within their sanctuary. For an hour, they fight these flying sparks until finally the main fire has passed, leaving blackened earth as far as they can see in the darkness. "We did it," Sarah says, hugging her exhausted children. "We saved our home." In the morning, the full extent of the fire's path becomes clear. Their homestead stands like an oasis in a charred landscape. Their nearest neighbours, the Reynolds family, had also survived behind their own firebreak, but the prairie itself is transformed. Miles of blackened earth where yesterday there had been flowing grass. "Will it grow back, Ma?" Matthew asks as they survey the devastation. "Yes," Sarah assures him. "The prairie has burned for thousands of years. The grass will return greener than before. This is another frontier lesson. Destruction often leads to renewal. Fire clears the old growth, allowing new life to flourish." Sarah sees it as a metaphor for the frontier itself. Each wave of pioneers clearing the path for the next, building upon what came before. 2 weeks later, Daniel returns from his railroad work, riding across the burned prairie with a pack mule laden with supplies. Sarah and the children run to meet him, their joyful reunion taking place amid the ash-covered landscape. "Grasshoppers, then fire?" Daniel says, shaking his head as Sarah recounts the events of his absence. "What next? Locusts and boils?" Sarah laughs, relief making her giddy. "Don't tempt fate." That night, with the children asleep and new supplies filling their storage pit, Sarah and Daniel sit outside their soddy, watching stars appear in the vast prairie sky. Daniel has brought real coffee, an unimaginable luxury, and they sip it slowly, savouring each drop. "Railroad foreman says the line will reach 30 miles from here by spring," Daniel tells her. "They'll need workers at the new station. Year-round work, good wages." Sarah considers this. "Would mean moving closer to town. Or I could ride in, but yes, eventually we might consider it." Daniel watches her face. "Would you mind being closer to town, I mean?" Sarah looks out across their homestead, the soddy they built with their own hands, the land they've worked for 4 years. 1 more year, and it will be legally theirs under the Homestead Act. Their piece of the frontier, their contribution to the Harper legacy. "Not yet," she decides. "Let's prove up our claim first. Then we can think about changes." Daniel nods, understanding. "Harper blood," he says, smiling. Can't fight it, Sarah finishes, leaning against his shoulder as the stars multiply above them, bringing light to the vast, open darkness of the American prairie. Sarah Harper Miller stands on the platform of Cedar Springs Station, watching smoke billow from an approaching locomotive. The railroad that had once been just a distant promise now cuts directly through what was once open prairie, its iron tracks gleaming in the Kansas sun. It's 1892, and at 44, Sarah has witnessed the American frontier's final chapter. Her children, Matthew now 25 and Lucy 23, stand beside her, no longer the wide-eyed youngsters who weathered grasshopper plagues and prairie fires in a humble soddy. "There it is," Sarah says, pointing to the train that will carry Lucy to college in Chicago. "Your chariot awaits, Miss School Teacher." Lucy smiles nervously, clutching her small valise. "I still can't believe I'm going. Grandma and Grandpa Harper would never believe a woman from our family attending college." "They'd be proud," Sarah says firmly, "especially Grandma. She always said education was wasted on men alone." The train pulls into the station with a screech of brakes and billowing steam. Sarah feels the familiar twist of emotions, pride in her daughter's accomplishments mixed with the pain of pending separation. When the Harpers of previous generations parted, it was usually forever. But this modern world offers something new, the possibility of return. 2 years isn't so long, Matthew says, hugging his sister. "You'll be back teaching at our new schoolhouse before you know it." Cedar Springs is hardly recognizable as the dusty frontier outpost Sarah and Daniel had occasionally visited during their early homesteading years. Now it boasts 2,000 residents, proper wooden buildings along a main street, 3 churches, a bank, and most importantly a schoolhouse where Lucy has been teaching since she was 18. "Where's Pa?" Lucy asks, looking around the crowded platform. Daniel had promised to see her off, but is nowhere in sight. "Or running late," Sarah sighs. "The telephone installation at the Mercantile is taking longer than expected. That's another marvel of this rapidly modernizing West. Telephone lines now connect Cedar Springs to Kansas City and beyond." Daniel, who'd taken that temporary railroad job years ago, had discovered an aptitude for mechanical work. Now he installs and maintains the newfangled communications equipment spreading across the former frontier. "There he is." Matthew points down the street where Daniel is running toward them, coat flapping behind him. "Didn't miss it, did I?" he pants, reaching the platform just as the conductor calls for boarding. "Nearly," Lucy says, embracing her father. "The Mercantile's telephone working?" "Good as new," Daniel grins. "Called all the way to Topeka just to test it, like talking to ghosts." The conductor calls again, more insistently this time. Lucy hugs each of them once more, tears welling in her eyes despite her attempts at composure. "You write every week?" Sarah instructs, straightening Lucy's collar out of nervous habit. "And remember what your great-great-grandfather Thomas Harper would say. We're Harpers," Lucy finishes with a watery smile. "Too stubborn to fail." As the train pulls away, Sarah waves until her arm aches, watching her daughter begin a journey that would have been unimaginable to the frontier women who came before her. Lucy isn't travelling west to tame wilderness or build a homestead. She's travelling east to gain knowledge, to bring education back to the children of the prairie. "She'll be fine," Daniel says, putting his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "Harper blood, remember." "Can't fight it," Sarah replies automatically, leaning into his embrace. They walk back through Cedar Springs, a town that exists largely because of their efforts and those of settlers like them. After proving up their homestead claim, Sarah and Daniel had eventually moved closer to town. As the railroad brought new opportunities, they'd sold half their original claim for 20 times what the land would have been worth when they first arrived. "Hard to believe this was all empty prairie when we came," Daniel remarks, echoing her thoughts. "Now look at it." Cedar Springs boasts amenities that would have seemed like impossible luxuries during their soddy days. A proper doctor with medical training, a dentist who visits monthly, stores stocked with goods from across the nation. The streets are lit with kerosene lamps at night, and there's talk of electric lights coming soon. Progress, Sarah says, with mixed feelings. She values the comforts and opportunities of civilization, especially for her children, but sometimes misses the wild openness that had first drawn her family westward generation after generation. Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller. A young reporter from the Cedar Springs Gazette hurries toward them, notebook in hand. "Do you have a moment? I'm writing a special edition about the pioneers who settled this region." Sarah and Daniel exchange a glance. They're considered old-timers now, repositories of frontier wisdom and stories that fascinate the town's newer residents. "I suppose," Daniel agrees. "Though we've told these stories so many times, I expect everyone's tired of hearing them." "Not at all, sir," the eager young man assures them, "especially with the news from the Census Bureau. Did you hear?" "Hear what?" Sarah asks. The 1890 census officially declared the American frontier closed, the reporter explains. They say there's no longer a clear line between settled and unsettled areas. The frontier's gone, vanished into history. That makes your experiences all the more valuable. Sarah feels a strange twist in her chest at these words. The frontier gone? It seems impossible. The Harper family had followed that frontier for 4 generations, always pushing westward toward new wilderness. What does it mean for the frontier to simply end? "I'd like to interview you both," the reporter continues. "Get your thoughts on how this region has changed, what it was like in the early days." "Come by our house tomorrow afternoon," Sarah suggests. "I'll have coffee and my apple pie ready." As they continue home, Sarah remains thoughtful. Their house, a proper wood frame structure with glass windows, multiple rooms, and even indoor plumbing, sits on the outskirts of town. Behind it, they still maintain a large garden and small orchard, unwilling to completely abandon self-sufficiency despite the conveniences of town life. "The frontier's closed," she says finally. "What would my father say about that? Or his father before him?" Daniel considers this. "They'd probably say it just means you have to look further. Alaska, maybe. Or those islands in the Pacific everyone's talking about." No more free land, though. No more Homestead Act claims for ordinary families. Sarah shakes her head. That era's truly over. That evening, Matthew joins them for dinner, bringing news from his own homestead 10 miles outside town. Unlike his sister, Matthew had embraced the farming life, though with modern techniques and equipment his ancestors could only have dreamed of. "Railroad agent came by today," he tells them, passing the potatoes, "offering to buy a right-of-way through my east field. You going to sell?" Daniel asks. Matthew shrugs. "Price is fair, and it would put the spur line just a mile from my place, make shipping wheat a whole lot easier." Sarah watches her son, so much like his grandfather William in looks, but facing such different circumstances. William Harper had travelled the Oregon Trail by wagon, spending months crossing terrain that Matthew can now traverse in days by rail. William had built his homestead with an axe and determination. Matthew uses mechanized equipment ordered from a Sears Roebuck catalogue. "Your grandfather would approve," she tells him. "He always said the point of pioneering wasn't to stay primitive, but to build something better for those who came after." "Speaking of those who come after," Matthew says with a slight flush, "I've been meaning to tell you both. Emily Kingston and I, well, we're thinking of getting married next spring." Sarah claps her hands in delight. She's fond of Emily, the daughter of the town doctor, who combines Eastern education with a practical understanding of prairie life. "That's wonderful news," she exclaims. "Have you told Lucy? She'll be so upset to be away when you're courting." "Wrote her last week," Matthew admits. "Figured she'd want to know first, being my sister and all." The conversation turns to wedding plans and the house Matthew is expanding on his homestead. Sarah listens, her heart full. This is what the frontier journey was ultimately about. Not just surviving, but establishing roots, building communities, creating futures. The next day, the young reporter arrives promptly for their interview. Sarah serves coffee and apple pie in their parlour, a room that would have seemed impossibly luxurious during their soddy days. "So, Mrs. Miller," he begins, "I understand your family has quite the pioneering history, going back several generations." Sarah nods. "My great-grandfather Thomas Harper built one of the first cabins beyond the Appalachian Mountains in 1792. My grandfather James took the family down the Ohio River to the Illinois country in the 1820s. My father William travelled the Oregon Trail in 1845. And then you came to Kansas," the reporter prompts. "Yes, my husband and I arrived in 1868, claimed our homestead under the Homestead Act, built a soddy first, like most folks did, survived grasshoppers, prairie fires, blizzards." Sarah smiles at Daniel. "The usual frontier tribulations. What do you think about the Census Bureau declaring the frontier closed? The end of an era that defined America for so long?" Sarah considers carefully. "The frontier was never just land," she says finally. "It was a state of mind, a willingness to face the unknown and build something from nothing. That doesn't disappear just because all the land is claimed." "My wife's a philosopher," Daniel says with affectionate pride. "Would you say frontier life made Americans different from Europeans?" the reporter asks. "Absolutely," Sarah answers without hesitation. "When you've built your own home, grown your own food, defended your own land, it changes how you see the world. You can't tell someone who's done all that what to do or how to live." "Independence," the reporter nods, scribbling in his notebook. "That and adaptability," Daniel adds. "Frontier folk learned to use whatever was at hand, to change plans when necessary, to try new approaches when old ones failed." The interview continues, Sarah and Daniel sharing stories of early hardships, community barn raisings, the first church services held in a tent. The young reporter is particularly fascinated by tales of the soddy days, the dirt roof that occasionally rained mud during storms, the constant battle against bugs and mice, the walls that needed regular patching like living things. "One last question," he says as he prepares to leave. "What do you think happens now, with no more frontier to push against? What defines America going forward?" Sarah exchanges a glance with Daniel. It's a profound question, one she's been pondering since hearing about the Census Declaration. "I think," she says slowly, "we turn our pioneering spirit to new frontiers, not just land, but knowledge, technology, ways of organizing society. My daughter's at college in Chicago, bringing education back to prairie children. My son farms with methods his grandfather couldn't have imagined." "The frontier made us who we are," Daniel adds. "That doesn't change just because the map's filled in." After the reporter leaves, Sarah and Daniel sit on their front porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. It's a view they never tire of, a reminder of the natural beauty that first drew pioneers to these vast spaces. "I've been thinking," Sarah says as darkness slowly claims the horizon, "about what you said yesterday, about Alaska and those Pacific islands." "Just speculation," Daniel shrugs. Don't tell me you're getting the Harper wanderlust again at our age. Sarah laughs. No, I think we've earned our rest, but Matthew and Emily's children, or Lucy's someday, who knows? Harper blood has a way of seeking new challenges. God help us if little Lucy Harper Millers start claiming homesteads in the Aleutian Islands. Daniel chuckles. They sit in comfortable silence as stars appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that had guided her ancestors across mountains and prairies, the constants in a world of relentless change. Later that night, as Sarah prepares for bed, she finds herself drawn to the old wooden chest containing her family's keepsakes. She opens it carefully, sifting through layers of history. Her father William's gold pouch from California, nearly empty but symbolically precious. Her grandfather James's river maps from his flatboat journey. And oldest of all, a simple wooden spoon carved by Thomas Harper, her great-grandfather, during that first winter beyond the Appalachians. Sarah runs her fingers over the spoon's smooth handle, worn by generations of Harper hands. 4 lifetimes of frontier struggles, each building upon the last. Thomas's isolated cabin became James's farm in a growing territory, which led to William's journey on the Oregon Trail, culminating in Sarah's own Kansas homestead. And now, the official end of the American frontier. The closing of a chapter not just in her family's history, but in the nation's story. But not really an ending, she murmurs to herself, replacing the treasures in the chest, just a transformation. That night, Sarah dreams of her ancestors, not as the icons of family legend, but as young men and women like herself, facing unknown wilderness with nothing but courage and determination. In her dream, they stand together on a high ridge, looking out over America's vast landscape as it changes through the decades. Forests giving way to farms, prairies to towns, isolated homesteads to communities connected by rails and wires. She wakes with the first light of dawn, feeling oddly at peace. The frontier that shaped her family for 4 generations has officially closed, but its legacy lives on in the independence of her children, in the communities built by pioneers, in the national character forged through confrontation with wilderness. Outside her window, a train whistle sounds in the distance, the modern world announcing its presence. Sarah lies in her comfortable bed, so different from the pine bough pallets and straw mattresses of her ancestors, and offers a silent thank you to those who came before. For their courage, their sacrifice, their stubborn refusal to accept limitations. Too stubborn to fail, she whispers into the morning light. That's the real frontier spirit. And in that moment, Sarah Harper Miller understands that while the geographical frontier may have closed, the frontier of human possibility remains as open as the vast prairie sky. As she drifts back towards sleep, warm and secure in the world her family helped build, Sarah carries with her the certainty that the Harper legacy will continue, not through restless wandering across unmapped wilderness, but through the same courage and determination applied to new challenges. The American frontier transformed her family across 4 generations. Now her family and countless others like them will transform America in return. The circle completes, the story continues, and somewhere on the edge of sleep and waking, Sarah thinks she hears her ancestors' voices. Thomas, James, William, saying simply, "Well done.